How's it going, everyone? With OP06 right around the corner, I want to take my own spin on a tier list here and talk about the decks outside of the meta that I think are potentially interesting. And, I think we all know what the best decks are going into OP06. And if you want a more comprehensive tier list of the meta relevant decks, there's a lot of great videos out there. Eggman has a tier list. There's this channel called Sakura Kingdom that does a really good deep dive based on the results in the Eastern meta. So very analytical, very data driven. And so there's a lot of awesome content creators out there that have already thought through, what is the tier list going to look like from the very top to the very bottom. Here, I just want to focus on what are the decks that are outside of this kind of meta relevant category that might make a splash, with the right pilot, with the right list, with the right circumstances. So the idea of like the top category here is these are the decks that are probably going to make up 80 to 90% of any major tournament. They're not in any particular order. Some are going to be way more popular than others, but I think in summation, if you take all of these leaders, it's probably 80 to 90% of your regionals and your treasure cups and things like that in OP06 for now, anyways, until more starter decks come out and more sets come out, EBO1 comes out, things like that. So that's kind of the goal of this video. If you like this video, if you like the content, with OP06 coming around the corner, please, support the channel. You can use my TCG player referral link down below if you're planning on buying some singles when OP06 drops on Friday. Would mean the world to me. A really great way to support the channel at no extra cost to you if that's what you were planning to do anyways. So with that, let's dive in. We'll go one by one here, talk about the leaders, and see which we think could make a splash in OP06 outside of the usual crew. So starting with Ace, one of my favorites. This kind of pained me, but I think he's only potentially competitive. He doesn't really get any support in OP06. He a lot of the red cards are film based, so I think you would use the same kind of kit you've been using for the last couple of sets. And unless I'm missing something with how you might adjust this list, he feels a little bit outdated relative to the power boosts that Sakazuki have, and then just some of the heat that new leaders are bringing with Perona, with Yamato, with Moria, and I think his matchup into yellow decks was tenuous at best in OP05, and it's only going to get worse with the addition of Onami and other cards cards like Reject that are really really powerful. So I think there's a way to take Ace and maybe go top 16 with him again in OP06, but not super likely given just how things have progressed in the meta. Next up, we got Arlong. This is going to be controversial, and I am heavily biased, but I think Arlong is the strongest he's ever been in OP06. I think he's kind of on par with Bello Betty in terms of his aggro potential. The additions of Kiko Noju and the Arlong character finally give him a 6k body that he can play with his leader ability. And so on your first turn, you can swing for 7,000 and establish a 6k attacker, which is just really, really powerful. If you doubt the potential of Arlong, I have a lot of videos up on him. I have a lot of streams from OP06 ranked gameplay. He can really go the distance. But like decks like Bello Betty, there is kind of like a high roll nature to him. If you don't see the cards, if you don't see the pieces, you're in trouble. And if they happen to just have enough counter to stop your attacks, you're kind of just done. You run out of steam. So that's why I think he's just competitive and definitely not meta relevant, and probably on the lower end of competitive, but he's interesting. Crocodile. This is another leader. Again, I'm biased. I didn't order this, by the way. It just happened to be that the three leaders I play were at the front of this list. But I think Crocodile is super, super interesting in OP06. I think Sanji is like a really nice addition to his kit. You can Sanji into Mihawk, Sanji into Borsellino, Sanji into Sogi King if you run him. And it's very, very interesting to have like the typical Croc board control playstyle and then have these an even better top end than he already did. I think Mihawk was always kind of really good, and he fell off a little bit in later sets because just being able to play Mihawk wasn't enough to get him the game anymore. But now you can play Sanji and Mihawk, which I think is a huge difference. So been really enjoying this Croc list. Again, I have a couple of videos up, a couple of streams up on Croc. I think he can definitely go 7-2 in a major tournament with the right list and the right pilot. Maybe needs to get a little lucky on his matchups, but definitely viable. And I guess like just briefly to go over the categories, which I probably should have done at the start of the video. Competitive doesn't mean this is like a meta defining deck. That's why we have the meta relevant category. These are just decks that can probably go 7-2 at a tournament, which honestly, going 7-2 sometimes just means you had a good day and you got a little lucky. So the difference between like 5-4 and 7-2 is really not that big. It's 2 matches. So, and 7-2 can get you top 16. So that's really what I mean by competitive. These are decks that can get you to the top 16 top cut of a major tournament, but aren't necessarily like the best decks in the meta. And that's kind of what we want to identify in this video. And then potentially competitive is similar to that category, just a little less likely in OP06. And then locals picks are the decks that I think can go 4-0, but not necessarily go, 7-2, 8-1, 9-0. And then total gamble are just decks that I think are a complete unknown, or I don't have a lot of experience with, or maybe no one has a lot of experience with. So it's kind of tough to say where they land in this meta. Moving on, Blue Purple Croc. I always loved the Blue Purple decks. I thought they had so much built-in synergy with the archetypes, with the searchers, and all this stuff. Whoops, but they just never really shown. I think they kind of suffer from the 4-life leader curse. There are very few 4-life leaders that succeed in One Piece until kind of really this set. And typically the ones that succeed have really, really good abilities. Like historically, it was Red Green Law. That was your 4-life leader that went the distance, and his ability was just broken for four whole sets. And now we have Enel, Reiju, Yamato, Moria, or sorry, not Moria, Perona. But all of us have really strong abilities or really strong kits. Like Reiju has an amazing kit that's only exclusive to her. So it's really hard for 4-life leaders to kind of go the distance in a major setting. But and I'll kind of put Garp and Kaido here as well. I think these guys could definitely go 4-0 easily, like without a doubt. Moving on, Doflamingo. I think, again, potentially competitive. Blue gets some nice additions in the next set. I think his ability is not as generically good as Crocodile's right now. Being able to kind of control the board is always really nice, but being able to put out bodies for a lower cost using his ability is really, really good still. And this deck, might have a really good day and go the distance. I just think it's not going to get the play that it probably deserves. And so, given that sometimes this is just a numbers game, if only 10 people play Doflamingo at a 500-person event, it's very unlikely that we'll see one get top 16. But if somehow he gets some popularity, we see 20, 30 people on him, I could definitely see a Doflamingo top in OP06. Garp. I think Garp's kind of a total gamble. I know a lot of people like Garp, and he's interesting, but Red Black just has not very good synergies. There isn't really like an archetype or something that ties it all together, and so I think he's just kind of an unknown even in OP06. No one's ever really cracked a list that gets you more than a locals win. So if his peak is a locals win, I think he's definitely a total gamble. Iceberg, I think, is a locals pick. There's some like really intense Iceberg lists out there. He can pick up some real big momentum. So if all you need to do is win 4 matches, he could do it. He could definitely do it. I don't think he's going to win any tournaments, but he could definitely go 3-0, 4-0 very easily. Ivankov, I think, is a locals pick. I think of the blue leaders, probably one of the weaker ones. I know this leader did get a top in OP05, I think, like a top 16. So maybe even like on the lower end of potentially competitive because it has topped in OP05, and I do think blue gets a little better in OP06. And so I think there's a world out there. But again, just need to have a good day. Like the difference between 5-4 and 7-2 is two wins. That's like so. I don't know if how many people like have really thought through that and made that realization, but it's really, really easy to just get lucky twice and then you're in top 16. Like I think I got a little lucky in my top 16 run. So if you can build a deck that goes 50-50 and then have 2 good games, like you're in a really good spot. And then we got Green Kid. I think Uta kind of outshined Green Kid a little bit in recent in recent weeks, but Green Kid's ability is still very generically good. I think it's a really nice ability, and so with the right list, I think that this deck can really go the distance, especially with 8-cost Kid kind of having a resurgence. There was a time where you couldn't really play that deck or play that character because everyone ran Thomas and Jet Pistols, Red Rock was rampant, stuff like that. Now all of that high-end removal isn't really available. All the removal kind of lives in Sakazuki and Moria stuff, and this kind of cost-based removal. But the Rosinante blocker shuts that down because Sakazuki can Ice Age your 8-cost Kid and then try to remove it, and then you could just trash your Rosinante blocker. So I think Kid's kind of generically good ability can really help him go the distance in a bigger tournament. I just don't think he's as going to be as played as something like Uta. So just the low play he'll get, I don't know if he'll go the distance, but I think he's a very potentially better deck. Maybe honestly, I think he's a competitive deck. His ability is just so good. 3 Dawn Restand will always be good. 8 Cost Kid is getting better in OP06. I'm going to be more firm. This is a competitive deck. You can definitely cook with this. Kinemon, I think the only addition to the Wano package in OP06 is Ryuma, which is a really good card, but outside of Perona isn't as good. So I think he's a locals pick. He doesn't really get any play. Wano hasn't really expanded for green in OP06, so it's just Ryuma, I believe. So I don't think that there's much you can add to this leader right now. It's just total gamble. I think I've seen it win a locals once, like a very large locals, and yeah. So I think if its peak is a locals, it's got to be a total gamble. Kuro, I think absolutely is a locals pick. Really, really strong, very aggressive, really nice aggro deck. But again, nothing has been added to this kit in the last couple of sets, so I can't really say that he's potentially competitive, but it can absolutely go 4-0 very easily. You could just steam down your opponents. Django is an underrated card. His restand events are really good. Krieg is still really good. So especially now, I think the meta leans very heavily towards 4-cost characters, so Krieg has gotten a little better. And so I think this leader can really surprise people. Definitely a competitive deck, Red Green Law. It's going to have a hard time in OP06 because of the removal, but this deck just has unbelievable ability to regrow its hand, redevelop its board. It's so good, and it's very aggressive, and I think that is still valued in OP06. I think there will be people who play this. I saw people play this at Nationals, even though Sakazuki was still very popular. And so I think in OP06, this deck can still go the distance. Luchi, I think Black has just gotten better in the last couple of sets. I think Luchi's kind of fallen to the wayside a little bit, but still has a strong ability. Again, it's a restand. I think restands are always really good. And if you want to cook with this list, if you want to try to put together something, I think this is a good Black leader that isn't Sakazuki and isn't Moria that can have a really good day at a big tournament and could definitely win at locals. Kind of pains me to do this, but I think Magellan maybe had like a small moment in that period when Whitebeard was banned before OP05 came out, where he could be super interesting. But you know, I don't think he's gotten any support. No one really puts in any time to, you know, try to make him work. So it's really hard for me to say if he's good beyond like a locals pick. I think for some of these, I just don't have the experience to comment on every single leader. I'm going to do my best, but Magellan's one of those ones where I haven't put that much time into him. I haven't put that much thought into him in the leader sets, and so because of that, I can't really see a world where he goes much further than 4 rounds. I think Nami's always competitive, no matter what. Like the deck it plays its own game. I think it goes through phases where it's better and phases where it's not. This deck can always get into a top 16. Like you think it can't, and then it does. Nami, you got to watch out for Namis. Like even if you think you have a good matchup against a Nami, sometimes you just have a bad game and against a good Nami player, and you're done. So never count Nami out. Always competitive, in my opinion. I think it's a total gamble. I don't know. I really don't know a lot about Oden. I think his ability is interesting, but without more Wano support, which I think is coming in later sets, it's hard to say that he's, you know, even reliable for 4 rounds at a locals. Kaido, I think, is something you can bring to locals because his ability is so good. You can really beat a lot of decks with it, especially now that there's a lot of 4-life leaders in the world. So if you kind of ramp quickly enough, you get your 9-drop Kaido out or your 10-drop Kaido, you use your leader ability, you can really take down a Perona, a Reiju, a Yamato. You might have some problems with an L, but it's 4 rounds. You just got to dodge an L. Just get lucky. I think that's what a lot of this comes down to. Sometimes you just get lucky and you don't see those matchups that you don't want to see. And if all you're really worried about is like an L or maybe Sakazuki because he runs so many blockers, you just have to, you know, get a little lucky. And I think Kaido can absolutely do that. And I think his ability is generically still really, really good. Red Luffy, this deck I don't think is even potentially competitive because I think the ability is really powerful with cards that have a when attacking effect. And I think in the current meta, when attacking effects are just devalued. It's really hard to get anything to stick on the board beyond 1 turn because of Sakazuki, because of Moria, because of like red purple law. And so if your deck hinges on you like putting something like a Chaka down or a Brook down or a Pell down, whatever it is, it's really hard for that card to stay for more than 1 turn. On play is kind of coveted in this meta, and so because of that, it's tough for me to see a world where that version of this deck does well. Maybe there's a more aggressive version, but in that kind of case, I think you would just play Zoro. Yeah, which by the way, I think Zoro's competitive, so no surprise. But yeah, I think if you're going aggro, you would just play Zoro. So I think this is a locals pick for a very similar reason. I think this is a total gamble. His whole thing is his restand ability. It's 4 Dawn. It's very expensive, and very few things will survive more than 1 turn. So you would have to do it with a brush character to get any real value out of it, and it's just tough. It's really, really tough to play Red Green Luffy. Another total gamble. This deck, I think it's just bad. I think it's just bad. There's so many better black leaders. If you're cooking with Black Sakazuki, I think that's just like a matter of personal pride at that point. You're like trying to challenge yourself. You're playing the game on hard difficulty. There are other black leaders that just do it better. Blue Green Sanji also, I think, just bad. Actually, no. His whole deck is like around vanillas, and vanillas just a full deck of vanillas is just tough to do well with in this meta, where you have Sakazuki and Moria just removing everything you play. He's like, his ability is not as bad as people make it out to be, because you're essentially playing with 2 more Dawn than other people. You just have to have a board that sticks, and that's the challenge in the current meta. If the meta was a little different, maybe a little slower, Blue Green Sanji could definitely be a local spec. There's so many better purple leaders. Don't bother. Like you don't need to bother. Smoker. Maybe a locals pick, maybe potentially competitive. I think Luchi's better, but I think Black is just generically really good right now. And so if there's a really committed Smoker player out there, I think they can have a good day. Uta, total gamble. Another, I think, potentially competitive deck. Again, Black is just really good right now. So many resources for there. I've seen some amazing lists with this. I think someone who's committed to this deck can have a good day. They just have to like really know their matchups. Same with the Yellow Mom. Yellow is really, really good now. This ability, I think, generically is pretty good. It's not as good as Katakuri and NL, but if you can go 5-4 and then get lucky on 2 matches, you can go 7-2, and that's all you need. Z, I think, is a locals pick. I think the ability is interesting. I think it just kind of got outshined by Sakazuki a little bit. They have a very similar vibe to them, and Sakazuki just does it better in blue-black than he does it in purple-black. And so it's hard for me to make a case that this deck can, really do well against this this kind of meta setup when Sakazuki has access to things like Houndblaze and the new 2-cost event in OP06 that just give him so much more cheap removal than Z has access to. Plus, he has cost reduction in his leader ability. It's just not really it's not really a fair comparison, and so to bring Z over like a Sakazuki is tough, very, very tough. I think this is definitely potentially competitive. His ability is still so good. 2 Dawn at the end of your turn, like you could be very aggressive with your plays. You can develop board super well, and then have all this defensive potential. I think that will always be good. He didn't top a lot in OP04, and then in OP05, I think everyone just kind of dropped him. But with a committed player, you could definitely cook something. Isho, locals pick. I think it's one of those decks that struggles as a 4-life leader and has like not the best color combination. I think Perona does it better because Perona's leader ability is better. And so it's hard for me to see this deck going 7-2 in this kind of like current environment. Same with Purple Yellow Croc. It doesn't get played a lot. I think it has a very kind of stall heavy game, and maybe some decks will run out of steam, but most of the time, a lot of these decks have really good top end. Like maybe Yamato runs out of steam against Purple Yellow Croc, but Perona has amazing top end with 10-drop Dofi. Moria has Moria. Sakazuki has Moria. Katakuri has 10 Mom. Manel has Yamatos and Katakuris. And I think a lot of these decks can just either win before Purple Yellow Croc really turns on, or just play a top end that's equivalent or better than his top end. Queen, I think, is competitive. I like Queen. I'm actually going to put out a Queen video pretty soon. I think Queen's a really, really interesting leader. I think Sanji makes Queen better as well. And I think Queen can still squeeze out wins in OP06. It's just got to get a little lucky. Got to definitely know your matchups, but could absolutely do something interesting. I think Rebecca's potentially competitive, especially if Sakazuki gets banned, which I don't think he will in OP06 in the West. I think we have to wait till OP07 like Japan. But Rebecca is, same color Sakazuki, can't attack, but has access to a lot of Dress Reservoir cards, which are really good. I think a really good Rebecca player can go 7-2. Absolutely. It pains me to do this. It really does. I think this deck just fell off super hard in OP06. It gets pretty much nothing. I think the meta outgrew in a way that makes him super difficult to play. I love this leader. I brought this leader to nationals, but I don't even think I'd bring him to locals anymore. It's really, really rough for him in OP06. The meta is just not super. It's not super friendly towards an aggro deck like this. Vivi, I think, absolutely look at those 4 rounds. Like this deck has, first of all, the amount of cards you can put in this deck, and people have really no clue what you're building. So just the surprise factor alone can squeak out 4 wins. And so I've seen people cook with Vivi. There's definitely potential here to go 4-0. I don't think you can go 7-2. I don't think you can go 9-0, but definitely a list that has some interesting turns to it. Black Luffy, I think it's probably one of the worst black leaders available right now. The leader ability is just, I think cost reduction is really good in these leaders right now, and Black Luffy has something to do after you remove something, but removal is key. And so for that, I think he's probably a locals pick and not potentially competitive. If he hadn't and be like a leader ability that focused more on cost reduction, as well as the arrested Dawn ability, maybe. But because these other guys kind of, I don't know, I think Restand is just better than what he does. That's the other thing. So being able to swing twice for 9k, 10k, 11k is crazy. But getting like 2 or 3 arrested Dawn is not as good. Yamato. I mean, yellow gets better, and a 6k leader on defense is good, like generically good. I think yellow is good enough that you can go 4 rounds with this deck. It doesn't really matter. If all you need to do is win 4 times, this deck can do it. And the additional pressure that you put on your opponent by being 6k on defense is enough, I think, to put this deck in locals. You're basically, now they have to allocate more Dawn to their attacks, plus you have the benefit of all the triggers that all the other leaders do, and so they put more Dawn on their attacks, and then if you pull a Sanji or something, that means they have even less Dawn to work with to go for game. So if all you're trying to do is play triggers and basically, high roll your opponent, yellow can do it. Sabo is better than Garp for sure. You could definitely win with Sabo. His leader ability is really nice. Like if you're playing a lot of blockers, this is a really cool leader ability, just being able to stop your opponent from removing things and keeping things on board. I don't know enough about him to say if he can go, more rounds, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like if you told me that Sabo is going to top in OP06 at least one tournament, I wouldn't say like, oh, that's crazy. No way. I think his ability is generically really good. It's just not explored enough right now. I think Bello Betty is maybe on the tail end of competitive. It's just super high rolly, very risky. And so hard to say if this leaders can really win big tournaments. I think it's very easy to just have a bad game, and I think the way to play against Bello Betty is pretty well known. But the leader build is just still so good. It's crazy good. It's insane. And so I could see a world where this has like a top 16 somewhere. Absolutely. Maybe this is putting it a little too high, but I think there's a world where it happens. Rosinante. You know what? I'll put him in potentially competitive. I think because a cost kid is a little better in OP06, it's going to be a little more used. He's interesting, and 10 drop Dofi is still really good. I don't know if he can go the distance. Maybe a locals pick. Definitely at the bare minimum, he's a locals pick. Maybe maybe it's like in the middle of the pack, but I don't know if he can go 7-2. But he definitely can win 4 rounds without a doubt. Purple Luffy, I think, continues to be good. Not as good as he was in OP05 because everyone else just gets a little better, but he could do it. Like if people can go 9-0 with this deck in OP05, they can go 7-2 with this deck in OP06. That's my thought process. I think this Luffy is actually really good. He's just not played because he's so hard to get, and the card support for him is so hard to get. It's so expensive. But being able to kind of continuously draw cards as a blue leader is really good. So you could just do a lot of removal, draw more cards. It's a very aggressive blue deck. And so I think if people had access to all the cards, he would be tested more. And so I think if there's a committed player out there, they could do it. They can go the distance. I'll be honest, I actually don't even know what this leader does. That this one leader I haven't looked into as much. So let's put him in locals pick. That's my bad. Let's if you're a red purple Uta fan, I apologize. I do know that there's a lot of film support for Uta in OP06, and so maybe this deck goes a little higher, but my understanding from what I've heard is that this is like the worst. This and Hody Jones are like the worst two decks in OP06. I imagine this deck is better than Hody Jones. This ability is very, very niche, and I think there are just better green leaders out there. And lastly, Rosinante. I think he's really fun. I've done a little bit of testing with this deck. It's super, super fun, but I don't think this is a leader that is going to like win big tournaments. But I could be wrong. I think this is a leader I'm actually interested in, and then we'll revisit a little bit. But for now, probably just a locals pick. And so that's the list. Very biased, not super well informed, to be honest, on some leaders. But of the leaders I've played, I think these are the ones that are interesting and could make a splash in that bottom 10% of decks that go to a big tournament and roll the dice. Just kind of reiterating so that no one comes at me. When I say competitive, I don't mean these are like in the meta. I don't mean that these are gonna win. I think that means that they have the potential to win or get. And when I say win, I mean top 16, which is 7-2, which means you can lose twice. So I do think that these decks have that potential, but not as likely to win as all of these guys in the top row, which is why we're exploring what else is there. And so, yeah, I think these are the decks. I think blue has a lot of resources in OP06 that make it more interesting, outside of just the cards for Reiju. So there's a reason kind of Sakazuki's still super strong. The blue-black combo is really good, and so I think blue and black just have a lot of potential. I think green is not dead in the water. Kid will always have a really good ability, and I think a lot of the red decks are still viable. Like Zoro's still viable, Bella Buddy's still viable. There's some mixed bag. There's like a mixed bag of leaders in here. I think it kind of spans all the colors. It really just kind of boils down to how much testing have you done against good players who are playing these meta decks, and then you kind of go to your tournaments on the day of, and maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't. But I definitely can see a world where one or more of these leaders have like a top 16 spot, maybe higher. I think some of them could go a little higher. Like I think a queen player could go higher because that deck has so much kind of sustain. I think a purple Luffy player could squeeze out a win. Maybe a Zoro player could squeeze out a win. But I don't know what'll happen in OP06. But if you're looking to play something that's not one of these leaders up here in the top row, and you want to try something different, I think these are all some good options. And if you're just looking to have fun at locals, I think anything on this list is a good option. You can make anything work, but there are just some leaders that are having a better time right now than others. And so, yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments. Feel free to roast me, but these are just my opinions. I don't think anyone should do anything based on this. I just thought it'd be a fun little thought exercise to go through for the first time, kind of blind, and see what's what. All right, thanks for hanging out, guys.